interesting decision we've got to make, but a short agenda. So let's see how we go. Apologies, Dalby, please. Do we have any apologies? Sybil, you've got your hand up.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Phil, I was on mute. Sorry. Sorry. Apologies for members. Peter Husband, Alison Ramsey, Carrie Clare, Marianne Burrows, Josh Andrews, Faye Padfield, Siobhan Robertson, and officers' apologies, Cam Core, Councillor, Chris he's attending, and Chris Bad is here now, Brian Smith, and Andrew Felton. Thank you, Phil. And also,
Okay,
just to let you know, Ian Budd is no longer with the Warwickshire County Council now, and he won't be attending the meetings going forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, I think we'd pick that up. Sybil, sorry, you got your hand up.
Yes, I missed it. It was broke up when Ponima was giving who could vote. And I think the group she was describing about the trade union couldn't vote, but it was breaking up. So could you just confirm, am I eligible to vote?
Yes, Sybil.
Thank you.
Sybil, we wouldn't dare.
Thank you, Phil.
Right. Okay. Item 2 is voting and actions from the last meeting. That document has been circulated. Are there any matters arising or comments from that? Okay, thanks very much. In that case, we'll move on to the main business of the meeting, which is to discuss the schools block funding. And,
there is one hand up, Phil. Sorry to interrupt you. There is one hand up.
Sorry, I was delayed I was delayed in putting my hand up. I'm sorry. I just wondered on the actions. There was one about the cost of energy discussion and whether anything had happened on that one.
I haven't heard that there has been anything else. It's something we've maybe got to follow up, Stephanie. I know that it was something you raised before, so we'll have a look at it after the meeting again.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Okay, item 3 then. Okay, so we've got to talk about schools block funding. We've got a couple of recommendations there, which we'll come back to at the end. But if recommendation A goes through, then recommendation B falls. So they're alternatives. Ross, if you'd like to take us through your very detailed report, please. I mean, obviously we've had a chance to read it. So if you'd like to summarize it and summarize what we need to consider, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So for those who don't know me, Ross Cause, Sentinel Inclusion Strategy Lead. And in terms of what we are looking at today, they're within the funding guidance. There can be movement between blocks, between the schools block and the high needs block of up to 0.5%. The council in the past couple of years has requested that 0.5% moves from the schools block to the high needs block, particularly in light of the increased pressures on the high needs block itself, and I'll come to a bit more of that in a moment. Before doing so, there must be a consultation which has taken place over the last month. All the consultation responses are provided. So the consultation document is Appendix A, setting out all the information we provided, and particularly of interest to members, I'm sure, will be how actually 0.5% would affect schools in terms of schools' individual budgets, and Appendix B were the responses from schools. So unfortunately, it was a low response rate. So there was 21 schools responded out of a possible, I think, 237. There are 2 further responses from special schools, which, just to be clear, because they received their funding from the high needs block, not the schools block. That's just part of the consultation. What we've done in the past, we've included their comments, but their actual kind of numbers, those 2 numbers of their responses weren't actually included. They were just added on and noted. In terms of where we go, I guess just to be really clear about the governance and process from here. So we kind of, I guess we have to ask the question is how it's put. So schools forum must they must agree or disagree with the recommendation, as you've rightly said, Phil, already. If the recommendation is agreed, kind of part A of the recommendation, then B falls. If recommendation A is not agreed, then we consider recommendation B as a yes or a no. The council does have it within its it's within the council's gift, so if they wish to what they call disapply to the Secretary of State, if they wish to, if they feel that the schools forum decision is not appropriate, they can apply to the Secretary of State for for the 0.5% to be moved by order of the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State would expect a decision to have taken place by the schools forum prior to that, and hence the discussion today. The council must put in by the 18th of November, so just next week, by next Friday, if it wishes to do so. No decision will be made by the DfE till usually it's January time. I'm not sure if they said the council can withdraw at any time. At the moment, it isn't. We haven't had it isn't clear whether we will or not. The council is waiting for the discussion today before deciding whether if it needs its apply, and if that is something which needs to be considered, it will look at it over the next 7 or 8 days. I think just a couple of points perhaps to note. So we can see the significance of the funding. So it's just over £2 million being asked to move between blocks. This is the first year that this would impact on schools. So in the last 2 years, this has been agreed by Schools Forum. But in both those years, I think the first year there was an underspend on the schools block. In the second year, we were able to use a reserve as well to do so. So it didn't affect the national funding formula. But this year it will, and there's a table within at 2.7 of the report to say roughly, to give an overview of how it will affect schools and how many schools would be affected. So 65 schools would not be affected, but all other schools would, with varying amounts, most of them within the kind of the £1,000 to £10,000 range in terms of how that would affect school budgets. I think it's important to say as well, in coming and requesting the funding this year, we do recognise the pressures on the school budgets as well, and it would be remiss not to say so. So we're all aware of the wider financial climate. We're expecting kind of autumn statement from the Chancellor, aren't we, and what that might look like. And so we are aware of the pressures on schools, and they are significant. And I'm aware, I work in the SEND inclusion part of the department, but other parts of the department are being made aware of schools where there are concerns about those deficit budgets going forward because of increased costs on schools. I guess though it's also important to say and actually what the high needs budget pays for, it does pay for children. When we are seeing increases in requests for EHC plans, where we've almost issued as many EHC plans by September this year as we did in the whole of last year, we're seeing increases in requests for specialist provision. We've seen increases in exclusion, and a number of those children who've been excluded have resulted in some of those extra places in specialist provision. So in terms of what the high needs block is paying for and where the overspend is, it remains to be spent on children. That is what the local authority is spending that money for. We provide at every meeting, we provide the update of the different cost centres of where that's paid for. There is an expectation from the Department of Education, however, whether we feel that realistic or not, that the dedicated schools grant does pay for itself overall. So by not moving any money between the blocks, if that increases the continued overspend on the high needs block, actually that just adds to a cumulative issue that will continue to kind of be there next year. so that, you know, we have to look at the whole piece. I think there'll be plenty of questions, Phil. I think I've covered a fair bit there, both in the report and about the governance, and happy to take any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you, Ross. So just to be clear, this is a decision we have to take every year. And this is the first year that it's become a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think we've, as a forum, we have supported the strategy as we've had the reports back for each meeting. I haven't heard a lot of critical comments as we've had the reports back, but this is the time when it becomes difficult, if you like. We've got to make a decision as to how concrete our support for that strategy is today. And I think, you know, Ross has said, and as we said it in our meeting with the officers the other day, this is the worst possible time for having this discussion and making this decision, because we're all aware of the pressures on school budgets. And I think it's not just the pressures, it's the uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen on energy because we haven't been told about that. We don't know what's going to happen with the financial settlement because we're still waiting for that to come out. So we don't know if there's going to be any more money for our school budgets. All we do know is that we're worried about it. Right, let's go then. Ricky Ems, please.
Hi, Ross. Just a question is for my own understanding. It's why are there some schools where there's no impact when it should be sort of why isn't it evenly spread across the different schools? Why are there some schools where they get a £5 gain, for example? Could you explain that bit to me?
Panima may need to add, it's to do with the minimum funding guarantee, isn't it? Panima, do you want to just explain that?
Yeah, so it's the way that the national funding formula affects the different schools. So Panima, do you want to elucidate on that, please?
Yeah, of course. Just very broad explanation. As part of the national funding formula, there is a minimum guarantee that all schools will receive a certain percentage uplift. However, there are factors when we do the calculation that means that actually without a minimum funding guarantee, if pupil numbers, for example, have decreased, and when you multiply these factors, their funding could fall. In that scenario, the minimum funding guarantee kicks in and stops them from losing out. Does that sort of make sense, Ricky?
Yes, thank you. I just needed to clarify that in my head. Thank you.
Right, okay. Sybil, please.
Thank you. As you know, I represent the Church of England of our schools, but I actually operate more in the Coventry area and more familiar with it. And I'm wondering why there was such a low response, 21 out of all of your schools, hundreds. Is it apathy? Couldn't they think it's inevitable? I'd just like some intelligence on, you know, why it was of this order. Thank you.
Sybil, I don't think that was unique to this year. I think that's been a general trend of our schools, and it is something we discussed last year at Schools Forum. So yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but it's certainly something that we have had a discussion about the return on the consultations previously as well.
There was some suggestion as well that I think there may have been some discussions in the local consortia, and there might have been a consortium response from some areas rather than individual schools. I think Nikki Burton, you thought that might have happened in Bedworth, didn't you?
I think some consortiums have been discussing it as a team. I think some of the schools have responded and not all.
Thank you.
Right, Andy Mason, please.
Hi there. It's really following on from Ricky M's comments. We all know the national funding formula is not perfect. It has this minimum funding guarantee, and in some respects, it's not just about falling numbers, but the way that the funding is calculated for each school. Those with high FSM, IDACI, EAL, primary low attainment will automatically get more added into their funding and push them nearer to the minimum funding guarantee or over. That automatically almost means that those that don't have those levels of FSM, EDACI issues, EAL, primary low attainment, do not. And therefore, not only do they get made up to the minimum funding guarantee, they also don't generally have a significant proportion of the issues in their community to deal with. They are dealt with by other schools, and they also need the funding. So I appreciate everything, Ross, that's been put into the into the document, and I do support it. But strangely, we find ourselves, and I'll declare an interest, with more need at the moment at the school. We've had 40 odd extra students put into the school, many with additional needs. We've just had to put a language coach in for 6 Ukrainian refugees who have no language skills, with no additional funding at the moment. And yet we're also the one that's going to be highest hit of all the schools from this proposal. So I want to suggest something. It's not that we don't want to support the proposal. Obviously, that's a fairly big hit for us. But whereas there's an automatic cap for some schools who may not pull on the need so much through the minimum funding guarantee, you haven't considered a slightly second option to 0.5%, 0.25%, and at least cap the amount that some schools will pay. So it's not that we wouldn't be willing to pay particularly, but to take that kind of hit and the additional need seems a bit disproportionate. So I don't think it's fair that some schools pay a significant amount and other schools pay nothing, because we should all be contributing to the pot to support SEN students. That's my concern about it. I know it's not of your making, but that's fundamentally what this proposal has suggested. It puts us in, as a school at Stratford-on-Avon School, that puts us in a significant dilemma of do we support, do we take our own self-interest, or do we find a sort of middle ground? So I don't know whether that's for a discussion, because if everyone votes for 0.5, I still think I'd like some consideration of capping the impact on individual schools to make good on the deficit.
Okay, thank you. Have you got any immediate response to that, Panima, or do you want to think about it a bit?
I have. It's certainly something we can go away and look at to see how the mechanism of the national funding formula would enable that. That's the bit I'm unsure of. I completely understand and sympathise the reasons for it, but it's the mechanism I would need to go away and check out.
Okay. Right. I've got Nick Evans next.
Hi, thanks, Phil. Just a comment really rather than a question, just because I'm head of a special school and we're predominantly funded by the high needs block, and we've been doing our budget forecast, and I've never known a situation so dire in terms of budget forecasting and the costs per SEN pupil that we have, and just to say how critical it is we get the funding to that pupil that needs it the most. And we do a lot of outreach support and work with colleagues across all different settings, and the two things we talk about the most are meeting the needs of SEN learners in each setting and recruitment, and we can't do that without the funding in the right place. We're finding it extremely challenging to forecast and meet the needs of our pupils moving forward, but because they're increasing. So it's just really to comment to say how critical it is we get the funding to that child that needs it the most.
Okay, thank you for that. Rebecca Harrison, please.
Hi, I just wanted to come in on one of the reasons why I think there was a low turnout on the responses is the timing. We were fortunate we got an early governor meeting at the start of November, but we do have half term. Agendas are already set. We're fortunate we meet monthly as a full governing body, but not everybody else does. So I think that could be part of the reason you don't get all the answers that you want when you need them. I know I will be voting no, unfortunately, for the funding, the recommendations, and that's because I know what our budget's looking like and I can see where we're heading, and I need to control what I've got, and our children, like we all know, are priorities. We've got a high number of needs. not enough funding to match the needs. So every penny I've got, I'm putting on our children here and now. So it's going to be a no, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Right, Stephanie Ferries, please.
Yeah, I hear everything that's been said. I suppose from sort of our representation as a school forum, I think what might make me uncomfortable is that there is that we make sure we look at the consultation results as well. So I think we can very much hear the arguments that are being put forward, and I think we're all sympathetic to the challenges that all of us are facing. However, the fact that we've gone out and consulted and do have some results, I think does need to feed into this discussion, as well as just putting the arguments forward for one proposal or another.
Okay, thank you. Nikki Burton.
Yeah, I was just going to say exactly what Stephanie said. It's a higher turnout figures than what we've had last year, which is an improvement and not where we want it to be at all. You know, we would love to have all the school responses, but as a school forum member, we do need to look at that data and look at the percentage of settings that are saying no at this moment in time, and we know why that is. We know where the budget costs are. We know everyone is really in a worry at the uncertainty of our funding in all of the schools. So I think we do need to look at that data and really look at the responses that the people that have filled in the form have put and their concerns. And I know 2 years ago when we had this discussion, we had a big discussion about how it was an easier discussion because there was a reserve in the schools block. And there isn't that reserve now, and we are seeing that impact schools in a different way. Obviously, what Nick said is absolutely valid and so true. We need to get that money to the vulnerable learners, but we also have to look at all the responses we've got and really take that into consideration when we vote. We have to vote for the consultation of what we can see, not just personally for our schools.
Okay, thank you. Right. So Van, just ask Ross, if these proposals don't go through today, will the council apply for disapplication? I think you just to be sure, just to confirm.
Yeah, I can.
I think you said that decision's not been made yet.
It hasn't been made. Yeah, if I just respond to a couple of the other points made, I mean, I think in terms of Andy's point, as those with English as additional language doesn't come up under this funding. I'm aware that the council still hasn't made a decision, I don't think, about some of the funding that's come in for Ukraine nationals and how that's distributed. There's been a delay on that, so just there should be some funding coming out regarding about that, but the council hadn't agreed exactly what that was yet. I think the other thing which is difficult, I know Andy said about the kind of there could be a price cap. Obviously, we haven't proposed that. I think in terms of what Schools Forum is looking at today, they can only go on what we've gone out with and what we've looked at. That's certainly food for thought for the future. I guess it's that sliding scale, isn't it? And certainly when we look at, for example, the SEN notional funding to each school, there's a huge sliding scale that goes from in some cases just a few £1,000 up to about 1.2 million pounds is the highest. So that's how that looks. But I appreciate Andy's point in terms of the some of the different factors that come into that. In terms of the consultation responses, certainly not trying to overlook those. And just to be clear, it was 2/3 against and a third for of those that responded. And just to be apologies if I overlooked that too quickly. That was the response of all the schools that responded. In terms of where we go from here, as I say, the council it's up to the council. If Schools Forum does not agree it, whether it wishes to disapply, it must do so by the 18th of November. The council have not decided yet. We wanted to have the discussion, almost get the kind of the tone as well from Schools Forum as to where kind of schools sat with this. So the decision hasn't been taken. We will inform Schools Forum should we wish to do that. One of the options open to the council as well is that we could, I guess, in terms of keeping options open, we can submit a disapplication by next week and withdraw it in that period over to January as well, in terms of further discussion within the council. But to be clear, no decision has been made yet on that, Phil.
Okay. And it's also true to say, isn't it, that if we don't approve that, if the council doesn't apply for disapplication, or if it doesn't get the disapplication, that deficit's still going to be there, and it will still be there next year, and we've got to have a recovery plan for getting high needs block back into balance, haven't we?
Yeah, so I mean, if I comment on that and kind of the impact on that, Phil, so yes, it will remain there. At the moment, we've come below the 1% overspend threshold, so we don't have the DfE kind of demanding, if you like, various plans from us. And what we tried to show in the conversation is actually through a combination of factors, through our send change program, through previous 0.5 adjustments, and through some extra funding from the from central government, actually we've brought that forecast right down. So people may remember one of our original forecasts for last year was that we were going to be 11 million overspent, and it ended up being 3. So a combination of factors has really contributed to that. We will be continuing with the send change program. I think that some of the concerns that we have is we are seeing that we are seeing some of those things, we saw a bit of a drop in requests for EHC assessments. Those have gone up again. We've seen gone up again those requests for special assistance. So we can see the pressures on us, and that's seen in schools as well. Nick's just kind of mentioned as well, kind of the pressures in special schools and the numbers that are being supported. I think just coming back to some of the consultation responses as well. Some of the answers say this masks the issue. And I think we have some sympathy with that. So the councils continue to lobby the DfE in terms of additional funding and high needs funding. This is one of those areas where the official Department for Education position is that dedicated schools grants should balance themselves essentially within each local area. But as we've said before a number of times, we are not the only local authority with an overspend on our high needs block. So that lobbying will continue, but it doesn't solve the problem. It does, I guess, it does point to what the issues are to the Department for Education.
Okay, thank you. Andy Mason, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, I mean, just on a personal level, I would absolutely want to support, the proposal and supporting the kids with the most need and things. I think empathetically we would. And at the moment, the way the paper's gone out, we would probably have to vote no, just purely on the scale of the hit on us. And some of the more, the more sizable mainstream secondary schools in Warwickshire. I sit between 2 grammar schools who are going to pay nothing, and we're going to get hit with that amount of money, and that doesn't seem equitable to deal with this issue. I'm not having a go at the grammar schools. It's not their fault that the national funding formula is set in that way. So, regardless of that and self-interest, not just about our self-interest, there is some significant hits on some of the bigger schools who are taking at the moment bigger hits on staffing costs and other costs, and they're having to make provision for more children probably. So if we end up getting down to no, and you have to go for this application, when you go for that disapplication, if that's where we get to, then I'd still like the issue of capping it considered. And I have to say, if the thought of capping it had been considered before this, then I would certainly, even if it would cost us maybe at a lower level, we may have been more in favour of saying yes. So we've been put, as I say, we've been put in an enviable position just by the scale of the hit at a time when we're trying to find money for supporting the very people that we're talking about. And so this process today is going to end up with a vote at our end that we perhaps don't want to give you and feel would be unsupportive, but we actually don't feel we have any choice. So I know Yeah, if you do go for this application, then I think you
yeah.
have to think about the what you go and ask for, and whether it's fair to. I think if it's fair to ask some people for 0, then other people could have 0.2% or 0.1%. I don't know what it might be, but I think that's a tricky
we
one.
understand the point. I don't, on a kind of a point of how we work, I don't think we can change what we've sent out.
No, I just wanted to make you aware that even if you go for the disapplication, because the process has got to that point, you can still consider that
at that point.
I think. Okay.
Okay, thank you for that. Pamina, did you want to come in now, or do you want to wait till I've had all the other speakers?
Wait, Phil, but I did have my hand up, but I have taken it down. Actually, my point was raised by somebody else.
All right, I've got Jane Burrows next then, please.
Hi, I was just wanting to ask, what is the high needs block deficit forecast to be at the end of this financial year? Just so we have some kind of concept with, you know, what we're talking about, because I know it was forecast to be 2.4 million. That was at the last meeting. So that's my first part of my question. What is it forecast to be at the moment? And if nobody has an answer, so my second question.
Off the top of my head, Jane, off the top of my head, I think it's 3.2 million at period 7.
Okay. So, you know, firstly the positive, you know, significant improvement has been made since me starting in Schools Forum, and you know, that is amazing, and that's you know, fantastic work. My concern is that if you are asking for this transfer of the 0.5, what you're doing is moving the problem, because you're taking 2 million to a deficit that's 2.43 million. So you're closing one deficit in the high needs block, but you're creating pain in the school funds block. So I just wanted to raise that point. We need to think about that in context. So that's my point.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I can. I was just looking for my figures, but I can come in and respond to the projections.
Yeah, do that. If you want to come back at the end, I'll let you anyway.
Okay. So do you want me to come back at the end? Sorry,
yeah,
Phil.
No, it's right. You can do it now to answer Jane's question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the figures have gone up, but the last set of figures for period 6, I do believe the projection has gone up, but at period 6, the forecast was 2.4 million deficit at the end of this financial year. We have currently is about 15 million, just over 15 million. It is worth saying that last year we outturned, so 21-22, we outturned at just over 2 million, 2.130 million, but at this point of last year, we were forecasting 4 million. Etc. between period 6 and the outturn of last year made a significant difference. I just thought it was worth raising.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Dwayne, please.
Yeah, I just want to put it into context, a little bit more context for colleagues in terms of the actual pressures this year against the high needs block. So we can understand when Ross talks about specialist provision, we are talking about ISPs, which are our highest costing provisions. We are seeing a marked increase in children accessing that provision because either our special schools can't meet need, and we've seen a big shift from our secondary schools requesting children that come out of there into ISPs, and that's going to put a significant pressure on the high needs block. I also want to bring in about exclusions, permanent exclusions, and permanent exclusions puts a big pressure on the high needs block because then we fund the 6th day of provision, and we've seen 116% increase in permanent exclusions. I also want to come back about sort of the safety valve programme from the DFE, and Chris Bade and I are both involved with the DFE at the moment, and even though we don't qualify for the safety valve, we are working with the DFE, and I think, Chris, I can see your face, but I think we're in phase 3 of the programme about delivering better value. So, you know, we are absolutely working with the teams to make sure that everything we do around SEND. But the pressures, I mean, I can't underestimate the pressures, and I think it's going to show in the final budget of what we are feeling in terms of against the high needs block, because it doesn't just fund top up money, it does fund other services as well. Just want to update Cods on that.
Okay, thank you for that. Rose Gunn, please.
Hello, thank you. I think it's important, I just said, it's not about being unsupportive, but I think what's really important is to understand that pressure for a local authority. We get that, but there's equally that pressure for heads in schools, and as a small school, I'm not a big school, you know, the delay in getting children to have that EHCP needs impact, and the fact that I'm spending money that I then won't get by the time those children have moved on, or they've secured their EHCP that they might need. It's important that heads know that lobbying is going on with government, because it's an issue, not, like I say, not just for the local authority, but for heads individually and wider politically. You know, there's a massive need, you know, increasing sort of SEN needs that budgets don't match, and it's as you said, it's an issue not just for our local authority but for others. So it's really important that I think some of that information about the lobbying that's going on is shared, so that we can, you know, be of support in trying to address the fact that it's a much wider issue. So yes, I just want, you know, it's important we hear that bit of information too.
Okay, thank you. Nikki Burton.
Yeah, I think just to come in, obviously as School Forum, we have all supported over the last 2 years the Send Change programme, and there's been such a massive, I think Ross, in your last report, it showed the improvements that are being made in all the areas that we're focused on, and I'm from the Ofsted as well. If this doesn't go through, Ross, can you just explain to us, as for Schools Forum, will that work still continue in the same way, and the high needs budget will go into further deficit, or will things have to be reduced?
Ross, do you want to answer that, please?
Yeah, so the programme itself has been funded through the council in terms of the extra support that we've had to work through the council. That goes through the council budget process. So we've had funding for this year, and we're putting in the funding bid for next year as well, to continue with the project management things, as you know, Nikki, such as the top-up funding, to actually have a much better top-up funding, which is the top-up funding is the amount we're talking about here. That's the high needs block. Any child with an EHC plan with that top-up funding, that's what this funding is. That program will continue. I guess what we're looking at here is as we've said, some of those pressures have continued to build, and actually kind of we saw such a drop in our use of independent specialist provision. It's been dropping year on year for about the last 5 years. We finally got down to national kind of averages. We've just seen that increase again, and so we're kind of it. I think that reflects the pressures on schools, not just high needs block. It is across the whole piece. But we will continue with that work. But the deficit that we're trying to address will just accumulate. It doesn't go away. The council can't write off that, whether it's 2 or 3 million. The council can't write that off. That will still be there next year and just be added on to next year's forecast effectively.
Thanks, Ross.
Okay, thank you. Chris Baird, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I think, colleagues, it just indicates everywhere we sit, there is this pressure, isn't it? And we all have different views on it, but we are all experiencing it. And one of the, I think, the great things that's evident with Warwickshire and Schools Forum and the work that you've done, almost as custodians of the system, that the action you've taken over the last 3 years and some of the votes you've done have brought some of this this pressure downwards. But I think, you know, both from a school level perspective, but also colleagues that work in the council and across the county can see some of the pressures building again. And, you know, we all kind of forget, but remember that we have been coming out of a pandemic, and there's, you know, emerging need issues, things that are adding to pressures that might not have been there 3 years before. So I know colleagues in the council, we're kind of thinking about what the next steps are, as Ross has set out, and no decision's been made, but it's been really useful to hear the points that colleagues have been making. I know the cabinet member is very keen on lobbying herself, and will be doing that, and continues to do that on Warwickshire's behalf. But Warwickshire's not alone, so I know through the professional forums that Warwickshire's part of, that's being done as well. I guess the picture isn't great, is it, for more money into the sector? But we'll have to see from next week. In terms of the DFE programme, as colleagues and Dwayne in particular has said, Warwickshire's part of it's DBV, delivering best value. So the DFE has a programme which isn't the safety valve programme, it's kind of another rung on the ladder, so to speak. And Warwickshire's in wave 3 of that. So we've had some initial discussions with them, and they've shared some PowerPoints of learning from other areas, and we'll be engaged with them next April about, they want to see the analysis of what could be done to bring down the high needs block deficit. I have to say, from the change programme that you're all part of and have endorsed, much of what other local authorities are doing, we are doing. So, there's no magic bullet that will come in and solve things next April. I suppose the other point I'd just make is that, the money that has transferred over the past 2 years has been a key part of it. If money isn't transferred, you can't add in 1% when times are good. Do you see what I mean? Once you miss that 5% in 1 year, there's no going back, and that may be the right thing to do in the present circumstances, but it's just that point that it kind of compounds things, doesn't it? It's not a one-off event. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Jane Burrows, please.
Yes, I just wanted to follow on from Dwayne's points and also what Phil and Chris, you've kind of alluded to. And we need to look at the big picture. So I understand the pressures on high needs, but everybody's alluded to it. We all know it. Schools in general are facing a massive issue and a massive pressure on budgets. And we are struggling post-pandemic. We are struggling with behaviour. We are struggling with more students with additional needs. We are struggling with recruitment of staff. We are struggling with the cost of employing staff. So it's not just a high needs problem, it's an education problem. And we need to remember that context when we're looking at a transfer of a budget from one block to another. Are you just moving or hiding one problem by rectifying another one? So we just need to look at it in the bigger, wider context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sarah Bromley, please.
Hiya. I think my question was sort of already posed by Nikki and kind of answered by Ross, which was, would this really impact on those who really need it? Because I think in education, we all want to see the budget go to the children who really need it, where it's really going to make a difference. But if this money, which is going to be a significant sacrifice for lots of schools, is going to be moved to meet a budget deficit, which if we didn't meet that budget deficit by moving it over wouldn't be met anyway, then I'm not really sure that it's going to make a significant impact on those who really need it. And I think this application presents a picture to central government of the wider problem here, and that if we don't apply for that, then we're also not presenting that picture that our schools are really struggling. So yeah, that was my question really. What would this sacrifice actually equate to for those who need it, and is it about balancing a budget? And I think you answered that question with Nikki saying that the change programme will go ahead anyway. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So the change programme will continue, because that's the work that we're doing across all those different aspects, such as top-up funding, such as the workforce training. We've been looking at our panels, a series of projects that we've been working on. Many of them were internal to begin with, but beginning to be more external. I think the issue that we have, Sarah, is if we see the deficits going up again. Remember that. I balk a little bit at the kind of it being called a deficit, because all of it is funding for those children with highest needs. That's where it's paying for children in various settings, in our special settings and independent settings, in our mainstream settings. It's paying for that's where it's going. It is going for children in accordance with their needs through that EHC plan. process. I think ultimately where this has got to the what has happened in the worst circumstances was where the DfE haven't been confident that local authorities can sort out the deficit. What has happened is the DfE have taken control of the high needs block in those local authorities, and they've come in, they've changed funding bands straight away and so forth. They've slashed kind of top up funding in certain areas and so forth, and just said if we're going to make the budget balance, this is what we're going to do, and it's kind of taken out of your control as a local system as to how you support children, young people. What we're trying to do through the program, the change program, particularly that top up funding one, is try and make sure that actually we do give more funding to mainstream schools. I know it hasn't come through yet, but to increase stability, we increase the funding to our special schools as well, so we don't have to spend as much in our ISPs. I guess it becomes a scale, doesn't it, Sarah, in terms of actually the more and more you add to the deficit, the more and more likely the DfE will need to intervene. I don't think we're there yet, but the problem doesn't go away. So
yeah, but I feel like you've made significant progress on reducing spending, and you know, we've been in this position before, haven't we? Coming to the schools forum with this question, and I think before we make such an impact on schools' budgets, I think, like you said, we're not really at that point where central government are going to step in. I think we need to, look at what we do before that and whether how much of an impact this actually would have.
Forgive me because I don't have the exact figure, but I think what I would say is it's not just this year. There is, although we've reduced it in previous years, there is still an accumulation from previous years. So just to be clear about that, it's not that we're just looking at the only overspend we will have. Panima said it's forecast at 2.4 million. I think it's increasing from there over the last period, but it's that's to be added to the overspends in previous years as well. So we felt it was I had to deliver the news. I think that we felt it was great that the overspend last year was only 2.1 million, but it was still an overspend, and that is still not paid for elsewhere. So that is accumulating year on year. I don't know, Panima, if you can give the overall accumulation of where we are. But I take the point, Sarah. You know, we're not. It doesn't feel like we're at the point yet with the DfE going to intervene, but they will be asking, "What are you doing to manage that and get that down?"
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Nick Evans, please.
I suppose just to add to that point, and just to make it very clear how very full special schools are, there aren't any spaces. These children aren't going to be able to go anywhere else, which hence why there's such an increase in ISP take up. So the challenge of SEND in schools is not going away. We can't fill the spaces. I get 10 to 15 consultations a week for a space at Evergreen, and that means those children are having to stay within their current settings, and mainstream provisions need to be able to access the right funding. I know it might not have come that way yet, but that's the block that is going to fund those children with highest need that aren't maybe few years ago would have come to special, but are not coming to special more. We don't have the space because of many different factors, but the complexity of need has changed. So it's really critical that this fund, you know, the high needs block is funding pupils, particularly in mainstream settings, because we just don't have the spaces in special.
So the implication of what you're saying, Nick, is that schools will have to deal with an increasing number of problems themselves, and there's a possible risk of higher exclusion from school if we can't address those problems within school. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and if there isn't the money within the higher needs block, they're not going to be able to access the same level of funding that they might be able to if the 0.5 is moved across. And this is the issue that I hear from all schools that we work with, is we're really struggling to meet the needs of our more complex SEND learners in a mainstream setting. And I suppose just to provide that context that there is no space in special.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, Sarah Bromley, did you have your hand up from last time, or do you want to come back?
Sorry, yeah, no, I just haven't put it down. I'll lower it now.
Okay, thank you. Right, I haven't got any more requests to speak, so I'm going to ask Ross and Pamina and Dwayne to give us a final summing up then, please. Who wants to go first, Ross?
Thanks. But I think we can see the responses from the consultation. They've been shared. The request is to move that 0.5% as part of our continuing kind of working together with the schools forum in terms of the change program and working as a group of schools to try and manage the issue that we have. It is recognised that we need to continue to work together as schools, as a system. And actually, I've been I accept that some will vote against, but I've been heartened by the discussion, which has seen this as a whole system issue, which I think is one of the things that we've been trying to have that discussion with Schools Forum for some time. And I think it has been taking place. And I think the comments across the piece is recognising the high level of need we have, and we do need to support that, and particularly support our schools in doing so.
Thank you. Pamina.
I can just give a bit of a financial overview, if you like. So the cumulative deficit is just currently in the current medium-term financial strategy, the council is continuing to provide for an offset reserve to offset the cumulative deficit that is increasing. And at the moment, 24-25, almost 35 million. So the council is contributing to this as much as possible. There is a budget. This includes the next couple of years as well, which is yet to be approved, but has invested over 6 million if the approvals go through in the change and inclusion. So I just wanted to give a size of how much the council is putting towards this and is seeing this as a shared issue. Just one thing I might just say, and I know it won't be a popular thing to say minds, but it's worth just is where available. We are really grateful that Schools Forum obviously approved the 0.5% transfer. That's really great. And they did that because the council was holding a reserve budget. Currently there is 60 million in balances in school reserves across both mainstream schools and academies. And I just thought it was, I know that's not going to change anyone's mind, it's something to think about, that reserves are two-way. The council hold reserve, yes, but so do schools.
Okay, thank you very much. Dwayne, is there anything you want to say finally?
Yeah, it's been just over 2 years now, Phil, that I joined the county council, and we have been fortunate the past 2 years where we have agreed to transfer the 0.5 across. We are making changes. As I said, 2 years ago is a big tank and is a big tanker to turn, and schools are, meeting our children's needs. Just really for me quickly, we are coming out, Ross and I, and a public consultation in terms of our service reviews and how we're going to restructure the services that are held within the council so that we can get that early intervention into schools. So, I ask that you look out for that in the next couple of weeks, really. And we are continuing, and the council is still committed to the programme of change that we are required. So, yeah, just a big thank you really for the work you've done over the last couple of years as well.
Okay, thank you. Recommendation to a vote then. So the first recommendation A, is that the transfer of up to 0.5% of schools block funding to the high needs block for 23-24. All those in favour of that, please show. Okay, if you take your hands down then, please. And those against. Okay, that's clearly lost. About 923, I think. Is that correct? No, more than that. Right, you've got those votes recorded anyway.
Thank you.
Right, so the recommendation B then is the transfer of up to 0.25% of funding from the school block to the high needs block for the next financial year. So all those in favour of that, please show. Okay, if you'd like to take your hands down, please. And those against, please. Okay, that's clearly lost too. So thanks very much for your voting and for the discussion. Just quickly then, we'll move on to item 4, which is the forward plan, which has been attached to these, was sent through. Any comments on that, please?
The next meeting is on 12th of January, Phil, and there's 3 items of a decision and 2 for information and a comment. And there's another meeting on 23rd of March. There will be 3 items for decision and 2 for comments again. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that brings us to the end of our business. All we need to do now is cross our fingers for the Chancellor to give us a lot more money in the financial settlement. And I've only got tea in my mug. Thank you very much for your contributions today. Have a good Christmas, everybody, and we'll see everybody on the 12th of January. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you.
Thank you.